Good morning or afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Launching Innovation in Aerospace and Defense webinar presented by Hein Associates. I'm Shannon Reddy, your moderator and webinar organizer today. Before we start, let's take a moment to cover a few housekeeping items. All audio lines are muted. Please use our chat feature to ask questions. We will save time at the end for Q&A. The webinar is being recorded. A copy of the webinar presentation and its recording will be sent out to all registrants later today. Your active participation is important throughout the session. In order to receive CPE credit for this session, you will need to be connected for a minimum of 50 minutes and must answer 75% of the polling questions included throughout the presentation. Immediately following this webinar, you will be directed to a survey page where you can leave comments. Please check your inbox later today for a follow-up email that contains an evaluation form that must be submitted in order to receive your CPE certificate for the course. Our presenters today are Larry Schultz and Nick Fusca. Larry is the office managing partner for the firm's Orange County office. He has more than 20 years' experience delivering high-quality assurance and advisory services for both public and private companies. He works with clients to improve their internal controls and to comply with Section 404 of Sarbanes-Oxley, and assists public companies with SEC reporting requirements, including financial statement disclosure and registration statements. In addition, he supports private companies and private equity groups with key financial reporting, internal control, and governance matter. Nick joined Hein in 2015. As a senior manager in the firm's audit department, he specializes in assisting companies with first-year audits, multi-year audits, and multi-year restatements. More specifically, Nick works with companies in the manufacturing and distribution, retail, specialty finance, construction, real estate, consumer products, and service organizations industries. Thank you for attending today, and I would now like to introduce Larry Schultz.
Thank you, Shannon. I'd like to go over the agenda for today. First of all, we're going to cover understanding and managing program and performance. And we're going to drill down on program management, budgets and managing costs, setting attainable goals. Then we'll switch over to some technology topics. And then in technology, we'll talk about wireless technology. We'll touch on communication systems. And then we'll switch over to Nick will jump in and talk about revenue recognition. The aerospace sector has been struggling with program management for decades. Major A&D programs, both commercial aerospace and defense systems, are increasingly becoming more complex and sophisticated, leading to a significant increase in schedule delays and development costs. However, there have been improvements implemented, programs restructured, and decline in cost and schedule growth at the Department of Defense during the past 5 years. This progress more likely is due to maturing programs and a significant decline in new program starts. Although serious efforts by the acquisition community appear to be taking hold, new DoD programs are introduced, cost and schedule challenges experienced previously could reappear without significant reforms and additional investment in acquisition and program management initiatives. Commercial aerospace manufacturers are under pressure to ramp up production to reduce their backlogs, and in turn, lead times to fulfill current orders have been reduced with increase in production rates. Consequently, it has become increasingly important that major development programs are managed efficiently and effectively, as schedule delays may lead to OEMs losing aircraft orders to their competitors. Environmental concerns, supply chain strategies, concentration of OEMs in a single region, and dependence on outsourcing have all contributed to delivery delays. Specifically, increased focus on addressing environmental concerns has led to changes in manufacturing processes by aircraft makers. Furthermore, commercial aircraft manufacturers' inefficient supply chain strategies are impacting the entire value chain, with pressure on discounts and concessions on the suppliers. Major OEMs' engineering footprint were most likely outdated, as the majority of them had their commercial engineering unionized and heavily concentrated in a single region instead of being globalized. High dependence on outsourcing, including outsourcing of critical components, has been often resulting in integration issues. Significant and long-lasting improvements to program management in the A&D sector is possible by addressing the problems at the grassroots levels. Key focus areas, among others, should include having realistic cost and schedule estimates, empowering program managers, and making them accountable and following a knowledge-based acquisition approach. I'm going to move the slide here. And then the first area under this, understanding and managing program and performance, we'll touch on program management. And under the program management, it's really under getting an understanding of the contract requirements. In the commercial aerospace market, aircraft manufacturers continue to experience significant schedule delays and cost overruns in their new aircraft developments. High pressure on cost versus value drives proposal strategies that try to optimize costs by bidding the minimum acceptable technical solution and then anticipating subsequent changes. This in turn fuels cost and schedule overruns. This phase primarily focuses on the program affordability, availability of resources, and estimating the prospect of success of the program. Identifying requirements early on and avoiding including additional requirements later in the process. Maintaining requirements from the start of a project keeps keeps costs down and offers more realistic estimate on how long a project takes to complete. Improving program management processes and avoiding continued schedule delays and costly overruns entails, among other solutions. It's often seen that proper discipline is not followed across the phases of a program, such as a lack of scoping and initial capability requirements. Time and again, special processes and procedures are based only on a few problems faced in the past, which are not likely to reoccur. Some examples of issues due to lack of gaining and understanding capability requirements in the early stage are as follows: underestimation and improper planning, use of composite materials requiring more testing to demonstrate performance and reliability, new innovative and adaptive design requiring certification testing, integrating dissimilar materials. Many of the current production methods do not support the usage of advanced specialty materials such as composites. Another area is the technical complexity and how you manage changes. Technical complexity and the desire for technical innovations to be incorporated in today's sophisticated programs are contributing to the cost and schedule overrun we're seeing in the large development programs. While A&D programs are more complex and sophisticated now, acquisition systems are not nimble enough for these programs that rely heavily on rapidly changing technologies. Another thing to consider is external challenges. Increasing and changing regulatory requirements, such as environmental factors, just to name a few, have driven development requirements such as carbon emission and noise limits that require rework later in the life cycle, contributing to cost and schedule increases. A lack of understanding early in the program of what it's going to take to deliver the platform has resulted in the appearance of cost and schedule increases in both the commercial aircraft and defense markets. We believe this is most likely the result of optimistic planning. It is important to make sure that initial capability requirements are not overestimated and are reviewed continually in order to avoid any changes at a later stage. We are seeing the effects of this during the development phase of the program when we begin to try to integrate the myriad of elements and begin to test their performance. Existing program management tools, including material resource planning and management systems, are dated and as such are ineffective to manage and address today's complex programs. Another area is the production process. The production phases includes the commencement of the production and the operational deployment. There has to be an effective coordination between the buyer and the contractors during this phase in order to ensure a smooth flow of production without facing any hurdles. Lengthy purchase cycles lead to technology becoming obsolete during the phase of the acquisition process. The technology begins to acquire becomes more becomes obsolete due to the prolonged purchase cycles. In various instances, this has resulted in modifications and subsequent costs as well as schedule delays. Such issues are more prevalent in the new technologies and emerging in threats such as cyber. Late program requirements and changes require retooling or different manufacturing and assembly technologies. Global supply changes complicate and impact the overall lead time and cost when faced with supplier bottlenecks and breakdowns. Some of these issues are supply chain issues, coordination between prime and suppliers, and where the production process is not under your control. The next topic we're going to cover a little bit is budgets and managing costs, and we'll drill down on relationship between team managers, life cycle, design change, communication, and use of specialists. Having a realistic and feasible project cost estimate at the beginning of a program to help prevent them from rising steeply over the course of the program life cycle. Relationships. There have been various instances where contractors have failed to understand OEM's requirements to develop and deliver the best possible product in a timely fashion. Over the past many years, contractors have put in enormous efforts and spent huge time to convince the OEMs to buy the equipment manufactured by them in order to avoid losses. The life cycle. Length of the program life cycle. Today's programs cause further issues such as changing technology, obsolescence, and frequent requirement changes. Design change. Technical complexity and the desire for technical innovations to be incorporated in today's sophisticated programs are contributing to the cost and schedule overruns we are seeing in the large development programs. While A&D programs, weapon systems in particular, are more complex and sophisticated now, acquisition systems are not nimble enough for these programs that rely heavily on rapidly changing technologies. Increasing complexity of systems is one of the principal reasons that the development times have increased significantly in the past few decades. To address cost optimization and other technical issues, contractors and program managers should be realistic about their expectations of their program's accomplishments concerning timelines and budgets. Since implementing change and assessing the effects of major policy changes is a time-consuming process, program managers and Department of Defense leaders should be educated and encouraged to have patience. Anxiety by program managers to have and see on-the-ground improvements quickly could result in fewer new changes being made even before the reforms lead to positive effects. Communication. A discipline in terms of engineering changes should be followed strictly in order to restrict program management challenges. Implementations of any changes once the critical design review is complete should be communicated clearly, as such changes lead to both cost and schedule delays. Project requirements should be identified at an early stage, and adding additional requirements later in the progress should be avoided. Maintaining the requirements from the initial phase of the project can ensure low cost and can also provide more accurate estimate of the project duration. Program managers should ensure that there is an effective, smooth cross-functional communication between teams. For instance, different engineering departments should clearly communicate with each other before committing any timelines to management. Lack of communication may lead to delays or budget overruns, as inputs from some teams may be missing at the time of decision making. The use of specialists. Large companies could benefit from improving engagement with small innovative companies to harness their expertise to develop products and systems that are needed in a cost-effective and timely manner. Increased efforts should be made to engage with niche and innovative players, specifically startups from the technology hubs across the country, offering advanced solutions at a cheaper and faster pace. Next, I'm going to talk a little bit about goals here. Providing proper incentive empowering program managers while also holding them accountable to solve problems and reduce risk by effectively addressing issues early. Ways to empower your program managers and make them accountable. Give program managers more responsibility and make them accountable throughout the project. No-go decisions should be taken by program managers in cases where there are substantial changes that may result in projects being unviable or delayed unreasonably. Setting achievable and testable requirements should be maintained. On your workforce, skilled engineers and production workers will be critical to the future competitiveness of the A&D companies and the sector as a whole. A&D companies, therefore, should take the lead in managing the talent crisis by designing strategies that not only optimize talent acquisition and deployment, but also contribute to developing manufacturing and engineering skills in their communities. Fresh approaches in areas such as employer branding can generate big results when pursued in tandem with traditional approaches. Similarly, many manufacturers are using a number of the same tactics to talent development that were being employed a decade ago. New performance tools and formal process should be playing a larger role in any A&D manufacturer's talent management plan. At this time, I would like to do our first polling question.
Thank you. Question number 1. In this age of continuous pressure throughout the supply chain, you're challenged with the question, what are you planning on doing differently in the short term? Please select from the below. Consolidation of operations, reduce inventory levels, leverage technology to increase productivity, international expansion, sales team structure, or none of the above. Please select your response now. And now we'll talk about technology.
Going back to the polling question, it looks like the majority of everybody responded with launching technology to increase productivity. So that's a perfect segue into our next topic, talking about technology. Strategic use of technology can drive manufacturing growth. Moore's Law predicted that computer processing power will double every 2 years. Yet consumers and the manufacturers who serve them seem determined to deploy that power at an even faster rate. How to explain that within a few decades of the smartphone's debut, 2/3 of the U.S. adults own one. That pace of technology adoption among consumers and businesses is unlikely to slow, as nearly 2/3 of the manufacturers plan to increase investments in IT. Using technology, manufacturers will focus on customer relationships, top-line growth, and profitability. Fortunately, implementing new applications and systems has never been more affordable or flexible thanks to cloud technologies. Many U.S. manufacturers have cloud computing solutions in place. However, that long-term success requires long-term vision, strategy, and tireless deployment and execution. Success is never just about technology, but is predicted on aligning people, processes, and technology to design, sell, source, make, and ship products that delight the customers. If you don't have good people with the right skills, even the best processes won't be effective. If you don't have the right processes in place, even the most sophisticated technology will fail to achieve their potential. Continuously evaluating the use of technology is one key to advancing a business. Management must first ensure that a clearly defined business strategy developed in collaboration with all functions, including IT leadership, puts the right people and processes in place, and then supports them with the right tools and solutions. In the technology section, we're going to cover implementations, goals, corporate governance, cloud, and best practices. Build a solid foundation for technology implementations. Middle market manufacturers are especially vulnerable to gaps in talent or processes that can derail technology implementations. However, well-planned observations of the business activities, current and future, state value, stream, process, or workflow mapping can identify problems and solutions. Executives should see processes in action and talk with those involved in the work. How do supervisors and frontline associates think the process functions? How are they the right people for the process? Do they have the resources necessary to accomplish process objectives? It is not uncommon, for example, for an IT star at a middle market firm to rise to vice president or even technology officer without gaining the corresponding financial expertise or financial experience or people skills necessary to lead at those levels. Even more frequently, these companies often plateau and falter because of production and back office processes and technology that function adequately at a lower volume are not flexible enough to sustain further growth. Moreover, over time, these processes may have been supplemented throughout firefighting, adding workarounds and spreadsheet-based gap fillers, adding unnecessary costs, lowering operational efficiency, and inducing waste. One of the other strategies is identifying problems and establish technology goals and objectives. Yet, despite these problems, many executives at growing firms find that new technology is not the answer. Rather, they focus their attention on further utilizing their current IT assets and achieving a better alignment of their existing solutions with staff, with business processes. Signs this may be appropriate include the existing system is not aligned with company objectives and business processes. IT and operational staff hired since implementation are not fully utilizing system functionality. Data accuracy has declined. Existing software models are not required at the start or now necessary. As you're going through this technology, one of the key functions is also corporate governance. Middle market manufacturers with good corporate governance plan their technical evolutions with care, developing and deploying a strategy with measurable goals and objectives. From this strategy, they develop tactical plans which also serve as to cascade challenges and opportunities throughout the organization. Strategy deployment typically bubbles up issues from the front lines that require IT improvements, such as mitigating a patchwork of non-communicative separate systems, including resulting from multiple acquisitions. Supporting priority customers demanding integration with their applications, updating older technologies ignored by millennials who hold new technical skill sets and have expectations for pervasive technology deployment, replacing legacy systems that cannot leverage emerging technologies or that truly lack the processing power required. Fixing technology problems requires leaders to envision a future state, one in which clear objectives are defined by corporate strategy. Technology improvement targets will be specific to an individual company, but they typically include solutions that link directly to the IT growing things. Implementation of a business system that communicates across multiple units and functions, even within companies created via mergers and acquisitions. Adoption of technologies that share information, new product designs, production and shipping schedules, order status, and the like, with customers allowing alignment with their planning and operations with those of the manufacturer. Exploration of new tools, mobile applications, enterprise social networks for younger talent investment. For the younger, talent investment in IT with the processing power and bandwidth to sustain near-term growth. Research into IT plans and benchmarks in the manufacturing sector can also offer a quick overview of a company's relative technology strength and weaknesses compared to that of its competitors. One of the hot topics over the last 5 years, if not longer, is the cloud, use of the cloud. Many of these implementations will be deployed via the cloud, which offers multiple platforms. But executives at the middle market firms also find that the cloud offers its own challenges. Requirements for enterprise bandwidth and connectivity, the performance limits of connected on-premise hardware, and the need to train staff in leveraging new capabilities. Rarely does an entire IT infrastructure need to be scrapped. Implementation options can usually be tailored toward an organization's budget and resource constraints. Some of the resource constraints is, moving some of the IT environment to the cloud, outsourcing IT components to third-party providers, optimizing current systems, enabling capabilities, implementing new systems or tools as required. All options should be subject to a rigorous return on investment analysis within the context of laying a foundation for future growth. And this kind of goes back to the corporate governance and the IT strategy. Some of the best practices on high-performing manufacturers ensure this by creating an IT steering committee that regularly evaluates technology needs, establishes ongoing IT training to keep pace with changing applications and requirements, backfills talent as in-house IT staff retire, strengthens IT alignment with the overall long-term strategies and priorities. This committee not only reviews past returns and recommends new employments, but also establishes a framework of metrics for technology investment, including productivity and profit improvements, that promotes proactive, continuous technology improvements instead of large, reactive, and exhaustive technology fixes. One of the key, items lately is the use of wireless technology. It's growing more and more and more, and so we'll kind of cover this briefly, going over these two topics here. Wireless technology is one of the fastest growing platforms in manufacturing, distribution, warehousing, and consumer industrial projects. A fundamental key to the success of these initiatives is the alignment of wireless infrastructure with a particular business need. A technology solution implemented without properly defined objectives, scope, and maintenance responsibilities is a project without a strategy. Before bringing a wireless solution into the organization, management should identify what problems it needs to address and the goals it wants to achieve. Only then can the search for the appropriate technology begin. Following are some of the areas which wireless technology can be considered, and once implemented can help improve overall operations, inventory management, information access, and other concerns. Automation. Many businesses are using robots and other machines to automate manual processes via wireless networks, but the setup and configuration of the wireless network involves a significant amount of work. If the robot goes too far out of range or has lost its direction, for example, it could no longer be part of the wireless process. If the wireless has any dead spots or failures, the automation is interrupted and must be remediated. While this solution may be a large upfront expenditure and more expensive than manual labor, the returns of such an investment include a significant reducing risk of injury or human error. One of the other areas is mobile printing, and that's basically being able to move around printers at different locations in your workforce. Product tracking, which is RFID, radio frequency identification, can provide more accurate location and services and tracking in a manual barcode scan, which allows only for point-in-time reference regarding where the item was scanned. With barcodes, if the item moves, it has to be scanned again for status update. RFID, on the other hand, is often utilized as a constant real-time location service platform that removes the manual process. Equipment maintenance. The machines that drive production are often complex and many moving parts, configurations, and maintenance routines. Using wired or fiber optic links to devices can be costly, and equipment that must be removed, it can be challenging to maintain a connection. A wireless solution can help downtime, enhance quality, and safety. Paperless. The more you go to digital, it just becomes less costly and inefficient. You need to manage expectations before purchasing wireless equipment. Management needs to make sure all stakeholders are in agreement regarding the equipment and the expectations of performance, cost, security, realignment, and management. Each major stakeholder might have a different idea of what the equipment is intended to accomplish, range from easy maintenance and process improvements to lower costs and access to that data. The key is to begin conversations early in the process regarding these goals and metrics used to measure progress towards them. One of the key things is assessing the site. You need to really lay out the site to see where you're going to have the dead spots. Let me go to our next topic here because we're going to switch over soon to the next. On the performance here, any wireless solution is likely involve a performance application such as enterprise resource planning system, asset inventory platform, warehouse management, or production monitoring suite. Performance could be compromised by poor wireless connectivity. However, as some applications can be hypersensitive and will crash for any reason, the connectivity is dropped. Investigating bandwidth requirements on the network, peak application usage, the number of devices, and restrictions could be part of the initial project planning. The growth of the wireless networks means that the number of devices connecting to corporate networks is increasing at a rapid rate, which can expose system security breaches and cyber attacks. Simply making the wireless network accessible through password is not enough. By isolating production devices on a separate network from corporate networks, internet traffic, and phone and surveillance systems, companies can create an island approach to networking that limits the movement of traffic and devices between islands. By properly segmenting a network, companies can limit movement between networks to appropriate devices and block the movement of devices that are unnecessary or not unnecessary or provide little value. You need to go through a process of choosing the right solution. And any type of thing that you're implementing, you need to make sure that you have proper maintenance schedules. The last topic we're going to briefly cover is the communication system. Do you need a new phone system? Some of the following are some questions that management should address as it assesses the current state of the company communication system. Does your telecommunications technology meet your business demands now and in the future? What are the benefits of a new system? Do you have enhanced connectivity with the manufacturing process with your customers? Do you have improved reporting with customer relationships? Is there a way to expand your customer service? Is there any increased savings? Has your technology system been updated or outdated or upgraded in the last 12 months? Has there been a decrease in customer satisfaction regarding responsiveness to calls and inquiries? Has planning for a merger or an acquisition included the telecommunications infrastructure? Those are just a few of the questions. Now I'd like to move to our last polling question in this section.
Question number 2. How are you currently using technology to grow your business? Please select from the below. Wireless, cloud, RFID, none of the above, or all of the above. We'll now move on to section ASC 606, review from contracts with customers. The next question is, have you begun to plan for the new revenue recognition standard? Please select yes or no.
All right, perfect. The results on that are actually, oh, sorry.
I was going to introduce, it's your turn, Nick, so you're fine.
Perfect, thanks. I was going to say the results on that question are actually better than I anticipated. It looks like we're at about 50-50, which is good. Means people are starting to recognize that this is fast approaching. And with that, the new standard will be effective for public companies with reporting periods beginning after December 15th, 2017. For calendar year companies, that's effectively going to be your 2018 year. So next year, so it is coming up on all of us. For private companies, it'll be for companies with annual reporting periods beginning after December 15th, 2018. So again, for calendar year companies, that's effectively your 2019 year. So private companies get a one-year delay on adoption. The new ASU on revenue recognition will supersede and replace most current accounting guidance over revenue recognition. There are a couple exceptions. Revenue from lease and insurance contracts as well as financial instruments such as derivatives. Those are excluded from the new guidance. So what are the objectives of the new standard? It's to remove inconsistencies and weaknesses in existing standards, to provide more useful information through expanded disclosures, and to simplify the preparation of the financial statements. The goal was to eliminate transaction and industry-specific rules-based guidance and replace this with a more principle-based approach. So what changed? As you'll see as we go through this, significant judgment is now going to be required. The prior guidance comprised more than 100 broad revenue recognition concepts, together with even more industry-specific guidance, as I'm sure we all know. These have all now been eliminated. The guidance first provides us with this core principle, which is an entity should recognize revenue to depict the transfer of goods or services to customers in an amount that reflects the consideration to which the entity expects to be entitled in exchange for those goods or services. This is important since, as we just stated, the new standard depends heavily on judgment. And oftentimes when you read the new guidance, what you'll see is the guidance will actually refer you back to this core principle when discussing how to apply the guidance to specific transactions and or contracts. It's not going to, in every situation, give you a specific rule for how to recognize revenue for a specific transaction. In addition to the core principle, the standard provides us with this 5-step model. We will first identify the contract with the customer. Next, we'll identify separate performance obligations. We'll then need to determine the transaction price, allocate that transaction price, and finally we'll get to recognize some revenue. So we'll go through these 5 steps. Step 1 is we need to identify the contract. A contract is defined as an agreement between 2 or more parties that creates enforceable rights and obligations and meets these criteria, which are the contract has been approved and the parties are committed to perform their respective obligations. Each party's rights regarding the goods and services can be identified. The payment terms for the goods and services can be identified. The contract needs to have commercial substance, and it is probable that the entity will collect the consideration to which it is entitled in exchange for the goods or services. You'll notice this last criteria is consistent with our current revenue recognition guidance. Contracts entered into at or around the same time will need to be assessed whether the contract should be combined and treated as a single contract or as separate contracts. Multiple contracts that are negotiated as a package with a single commercial objective for which consideration is somehow linked and for which one performance obligation is being delivered, these should be accounted for as a single contract. In the aerospace and defense industry, it's common for contracts to span over a year, if not even longer. They often include the integration of multiple goods and services. Because of this, we often see changes to contract specifications and requirements. Judgment will be needed to determine if changes to the contract have changed the existing rights and obligations, and if these changes should be accounted for as part of the original contract or as a contract modification. Contract modifications are treated as a separate contract if the modification adds a distinct performance obligation and changes the consideration the company is receiving. If not treated as a separate contract, you will need to determine if the modification represents a termination of the old contract and the creation of a new contract, or if the modification is part of the original contract. If the company determines that the modification is a termination of the old contract, you would allocate the amount of remaining consideration and potentially any new consideration to the remaining performance obligation or obligations. If it is determined the modification is part of the original contract, you would need to update the transaction price for any new consideration, remeasure progress towards completion of the performance obligation, and record a cumulative catch-up adjustment. Next, we need to identify our performance obligations. The company should account for each material promised good or service as a performance obligation only if it is distinct. Now, the new guidance gives us the definition of the 2 criteria that must be met for this distinct criteria to be met, which is first, the customer can benefit from the good or service on its own. That one should be pretty easy to meet. Next, the entity's promise to transfer the good or service to the customer is separately identifiable from other promises in the contract. That is, the promise to transfer the good or service is distinct within the context of the contract itself. The following factors should be considered to determine if multiple units of a product in a production-only arrangement are not separately identifiable, and as such would be treated as a single performance obligation. That is, the product specifications are complex and customized. The manufacturing process is specific to this product. The company is responsible for the overall management of the contract. This may include integration of various activities, such as procurement of materials, identifying and managing subcontractors, and performing manufacturing, assembling, and testing. The following factors should now be considered to determine that goods or services in a design, development, and production contract are not separately identifiable and therefore distinct. And oftentimes in the aerospace and defense industry, we will be doing not only the manufacturing but also the design of these products. So the criteria that should be considered are the design and the production were done in a single bid. They weren't two separate bids. The contract is for a new or experimental product. And that product may have unproven functionality. The contract involves production of prototypes or test units in order to refine the product specifications and design. And it is likely that this design will require revision during production, and likely that initial units may require some rework. We'll go through kind of a simple example of this. So assume a company contracts with the U.S. Army to deliver multiple units of a complex and specialized armored vehicle. The company is responsible for the overall management of the contract, which will require the performance and integration of various activities, including procurement of materials, identifying and managing subcontractors, and performing manufacturing, assembly, and testing. So the first criteria, each of these armored vehicles is capable of being distinct because they obviously provide some benefit to the customer, the U.S. Army in this case. However, we need to look at the second criteria. So the company has been contracted to provide a full complement of vehicles and is responsible for the overall management of the contract and providing significant service of integrating various goods and services, the inputs, into the overall services and resulting vehicles, which are the outputs. A change in one activity, such as a change in design, would impact other activities. And as such, the activities are interdependent and they are interrelated. Therefore, the individual vehicles are not distinct and are accounted for as one performance obligation in this case. Next, we need to determine the transaction price. What we will need to consider is any variable consideration, any possible constraints or constraining estimates on the variable consideration, the existence of a significant financing component, if there's any non-cash consideration, and consideration payable to the customer. This could be forms of rebates, allowances, and the like. Excuse me. The guidance provides us with two options for estimating variable consideration. You'll note this is a key change from our existing guidance, as variable consideration used to be seen as contingent and usually not recognized until earned. These options provided are not intended to be a free choice, but rather the entity should pick the option that better predicts the amount of total consideration to which the company will be entitled. The first method, the expected value method, estimates variable consideration based on the sum of probability-weighted amounts in a range of possible amounts. The second method, the most likely amount, simply estimates variable consideration based on the single most likely amount. Once a company selects a method, it should be applied consistently to contracts with similar characteristics and circumstances. Companies must now also consider the likelihood and magnitude of a reversal of revenue due to a subsequent change in this estimate. Under the new guidance, an entity must estimate the amount of variable consideration. You can't just determine that you're not going to estimate it and just recognize it when and as received. For contracts that do contain more than one performance obligation, the company will need to allocate the transaction price to each obligation in an amount that depicts the consideration to which the company expects to be entitled in exchange for satisfying each performance obligation. The guidance provides us with three options. It does not limit us to these three options. If the company has a better way of estimating, they're welcome to use it. A company may also choose to or use a combination of these options. The adjusted market approach focuses on the amount that the market is willing to pay. Now, this is based on external factors such as a history of selling the product on its own or when competitor information is available. The expected cost plus margin approach considers both direct and indirect costs plus a margin. Now, the margin must reflect the margin that the market is willing to pay, not the margin that the company desires. This method would be used when the performance obligation has direct determinable fulfillment cost. This approach will be less useful when there is no clearly identifiable fulfillment cost or the costs are unknown. Maybe this is the first time we've entered into this type of a contract. The residual approach. GAAP has been back and forth on the ability for us to use the residual approach with multiple element arrangements over the past decade. We used to be able to use it, then GAAP changed the rules and said we can't use it. Now, the new guidance, we are back to being able to use it, but only in limited circumstances. And this is when the company sells that product or service at a broad range of pricing, which makes the price variable, or if the price of the product has yet to be established. Step 5, we get to recognize some revenue. So the company will recognize revenue when or as the performance obligation is satisfied by transferring control of a promised good or service. If the obligation is not satisfied over time, revenue is recognized when control of the good or service is transferred to the customer. Performance obligations are satisfied over time if one of the following criteria is met. The customer simultaneously receives and consumes the benefit as the company performs. The company's performance creates or enhances an asset that the customer controls, or the company's performance does not create an asset with an alternative use to the company, and the company has enforceable rights to payment. Oftentimes in aerospace and defense contracts, especially with the U.S. government, the contracts typically provide the government the ability to terminate a contract for convenience. Typically, the contractor can recover all costs incurred as well as an allowance for profit. The government also typically has the right to the goods produced and in process at time of termination, not necessarily delivered. Many contracts also include design and production type services, which we mentioned earlier. Now, these types of clauses in a contract make it inappropriate under the new guidance to recognize revenue as goods are delivered, as the customer has control of the good as it is being produced. Now, this is one of the key changes of the new guidance, which is now the guidance focuses on when control passes, not when delivery of the item occurs. The guidance provides us with two methods for measuring progress of a contract and therefore how much revenue should be recognized at a single point in time. The output method, which is based on units produced or delivered. Now, in the example we just went over, this method would not provide an accurate depiction as it would fail to recognize goods for which control had transferred to the customer at the end of the reporting period, but had yet to be completed or delivered. The method may also not be appropriate for contracts which include design and production services, as each item produced or delivered may not transfer an equal amount of value to the customer. This method may be appropriate for long-term manufacturing contracts of standard items. The input method, which is the cost-to-cost method, such as labor hours to total anticipated labor hours or material cost to total anticipated material cost. The shortcomings of this method, which we'll go over a few more next, is that there may not be a direct relationship between the inputs and the transfer of control. The downside of the input method are inefficiencies. When costs are incurred that do not contribute to an entity's overall progress in satisfying the performance obligation, such as wasted material, labor, or other resources. Also, in some cases, costs are not proportionate. This may be a result of paying for a large portion of raw material up front. When costs incurred is not proportionate to the entity's progress in satisfying the performance obligation. In these circumstances, the best depiction of the entity's performance may be to adjust the input method to recognize revenue only to the extent of cost incurred, that is, at a zero margin. If at contract inception, the following conditions are met. The good is not distinct. The customer obtains control of the good before receiving services related to the good. The cost of the transferred good is significant relative to the total expected cost. And the entity procures the good from a third party and is not significantly involved in the design or manufacturing of that good. Try to walk through an example of this. So assume in July of 2017, an aerospace company entered into a contract to provide a product to a customer for $20 million. The company has determined that the contract represents a single performance obligation and revenue should be recognized over time using a cost-based input method. The total cost of the product is $18 million. This includes $12 million to purchase materials and $6 million for remaining activities. The material is going to be purchased at inception of the contract, and the customer obtains control of the material significantly before receiving services related to the product. The company has determined that the material meets the conditions of ASC 606, those ones we just discussed, and should be accounted for as uninstalled materials. At the end of that year, December 31st of 2017, the company has incurred cost of $2 million of that remaining $6 million towards the completion of the manufacturing. The remaining costs are going to be incurred in the following year. So in this example, the company will record revenue equal to the cost when the uninstalled materials are purchased and control those materials as transferred to the customer, and record the remaining revenue of $8 million ratably as the costs related to the manufacturing are incurred. So let's get out of the words and just kind of see how the numbers look at this. So when the contract is entered into in July of 2017 and we purchase that $12 million of raw materials, the company will recognize $12 million of revenue and $12 million of cost, but they won't recognize any margin. Now at the end of the year, December 31st of 2017, they've now incurred a third, $2 million of their total anticipated $6 million of cost. So they'll now recognize a third of the remaining $8 million of the contract, or $2.6 million versus $2 million of the cost. This will provide them a profit margin for that period of $666,000. Similarly, the following year, the remaining $4 million of costs, or 2/3 of the remaining costs, are incurred, and as such, the company will recognize the remaining 2/3 of revenue, or $5.3 million, compared to the $4 million of cost. This will leave them with a profit margin of $1.3 million the following year. The guidance provides us with two options for adoption. The first is the company can restate all prior periods presented in comparative financial statements. So any contracts impacting a preceding year would have to be essentially recast under the new guidance. Or upon adoption on the effective date, you can apply this to all existing contracts in progress and new contracts going forward. With that, I think we enter into a polling question.
We do. This is our last polling question. Is the residual approach an acceptable method to allocate transaction price? Yes, no, or yes in limited circumstances. We would now like to give our attendees a chance to ask questions. To ask a question, please submit a question via the chat box located in the lower left-hand corner of your screen. If we don't get to your question during the webinar, our presenters will follow up with you via email. We've just received our first question. What do you see as the biggest challenges facing the A&D industry presently and in the future?
Larry, would you like to field this one?
Yes, I was just getting off mute here. I think it's going to continue to be getting pressure from the upper tier customers for cost constraints. And so going back to your process in identifying contracts and program management and how to manage those pressures from the upper tiers, the Boeings of the world that are demanding lower margins at your shop.
Okay. We also have another question. What can companies be doing now to prepare for the new revenue recognition standard?
I guess I'll take that one, Larry. What you need to do and what companies should be doing right now, and as you saw in the first polling question, about 50% of companies haven't yet considered the new guidance. But what they need to be doing, what companies should be doing right now and up front, is first reviewing your contracts. As we saw in some of the previous slides, many of these companies will now be recognizing revenue or are currently recognizing revenue as they deliver the product to the end customer. This no longer or may no longer be the correct method. So the contracts need to be reviewed to determine when control actually passes to the customer. Now, this may and actually has a big possibility of having a significant financial statement impact of the timing of when revenue is recognized, which will inherently impact many companies' covenants. So reviewing these contracts is going to and assessing the impact on their current covenants is going to allow the company to have early discussions with lenders to avoid any surprises and help those covenants be rewritten timely instead of at the last minute.
Okay, thank you, Nick. This is the end of our webinar. We'd like to thank Larry and Nick for your presentation. That's all the time we have right now for questions. Please check your inbox for a follow-up email with an evaluation form that must be submitted in order to receive your CPE certificate for the course. Thank you for attending and have a great day.